class. This is your professor, Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm going to give you a lecture about archetypes. And I've done lecture on Jung's concept of archetypes before, but there's a real critical controversy that's going on right now, and a professor from Oxford, Jean Knox, has a new theory, a developmental theory of how the archetypes develop and what they are that I believe really complements Jung's ideas and extends them farther into our current science of flow and neuroscience and all that type of stuff. So I want to share that with you. Here we go. That's good. Reimagining the archetype. Jean Knox, attachment theory, and the emergent mind. So Jean Knox is, like I said, a professor at Oxford, a Jungian analyst. She's also in the British school working a lot with attachment theory and also the emergent mind, which is the new emergence theory of how the cosmos works and how quantum physics works and that sort of thing. So that it's an emergent, that systems are changing as they evolve. Presented by Dr. Brian Lippincott, professor of psychology, clinical psychologist, marriage family therapist, and flow neuroscience coach. Let's go into talk about Jean Knox and her theory. So we have the classical view, which are archetypes are conceptualized as innate, preformed genetic blueprints, biological entities. And there causes a scientific dilemma because depth psychology, insulated from neuroscience and attachment theory, risks becoming scientifically impoverished. So what is it that Jung actually said? Now, Jung tried to have it both ways because he believed that his entire project was his commitment to linking depth psychology to the extent that is possible to the larger scientific program of the 20th century. This desire clearly motivated his long association with the physicist Wolfgang Pauli, and it is evident in other places as well. In the case of the early work on the archetypes, the most important influences appear to come from the first ethologist and the emerging neo-Darwinian model of evolutionary theory. And I've talked about that myself, about evolutionary theory and the male sickleback fish, which when the female fish put a certain hormone in the water, when they put their eggs there, all the males go through this battle because their bellies turn red. And that red is a sign stimulus. And then dominance hierarchy in primates and chimps is well known. So that's the scientific part that Jung relied on. But the distinction is Jung also has this other more mystical idea about archetype, where he draws what is in between termed the archetype, the distinction. Jung makes a distinction between the archetype as such and the archetypal image. Because if we really saw the archetype as such, if we really experienced it, we'd be putting 200,000 volts of electricity in the, 80 or 120 volts that are in your house. It would blow out the whole thing. You can't really experience the archetype, Jung said exactly. Now, the archetypal image is all you can really see of it. The image is the representation that we find in a given myth. Of Beowulf, Hercules, Hiawatha are all images of the hero archetype. And Jung is emphatic that these particular representations are cultural in origin and show certain variations from culture to culture. However, evolution has in some manner equipped the human mind with the capacity and the tendency to form or otherwise engage images of that sort. That's our whole drama and television to art to on and on. All of our creative in-depth things. Unfortunately, Jung is extremely vague on how he thinks this has taken place or in what form the archetype as such is to be conceptualized. He tends to heavily rely on metaphors to explain what he means by the archetype as such, the archetype in itself. And he says, it's like a crystal lattice implicit in the supersaturation solution, or it's like the instinct of the weaver bird, or it is somehow transmuted by Mendelian particles. So he has all these explanations for it. But he's trying to be scientific, and he's trying to look at the artistic part of it. And his Red Book, when he was going through all that, where he was having all these mystical artistic experiences with the unconscious. So Enter Jean Knox. Bridging the subjective meaning. How do you bridge the subjective meaning making of psychoanalysis with the objective rigor of developmental cognitive science? So how do you create a bridge between the subjective meaning making of psychoanalysis, that everything is what you make of it, with the objective rigor of developmental cognitive science? How do you put cognitive science and psychoanalysis together? So, Knox rejects the innate. The human mind does not contain preformed packets of imagery waiting to pop out. The genetic transmission of symbols is biological Lamarckianism. That's talking about Lamarckianism, that you can't inherit things like your blue eyes and that kind of thing. But now we have epigenetics now, so things can be either turned on or turned off due to things now. So it's a little bit more, that's moving more towards the emergent versus but epigenetics is something that Jean Knox has to deal with. The emergent model. Archetypes are emergent processes of a dynamic, self-organizing developmental system combining brain, environment, and narrative. So combining our brain structures, the environment, how much love we have, how our mother feeds us and nurtures us or doesn't, or how our caretakers are, the extended family, the narrative, that what is our name, where do we come from, who are we, who are we told about ourselves. And now that whole narrative is online, so we have to deal with the whole AI. What does AI think of us? And it's really wild. There's a schema here that's getting made. The scaffolding. Knox equates Jung's classical archetype-as-such with a concept from cognitive science, the image schema. What is an image schema? You might say. The definition is the primitive conceptual structures or gestalts derived directly from an infant's earliest physical, spatial, and bodily experiences in the physical world, what their environment like, and it's really about the mirror neurons that get triggered. Or you look at them, do you see them? Do we delight in them? So, but an image schema has zero symbolic content. Just like Plato's form have no exact content. They're in empty form. They are empty. They contain no symbolic, mythological, or representational imagery. It's like an empty box. Pre-verbal and unconscious, they operate entirely outside of conscious awareness. The function, they serve as the invisible scaffolding upon which all subsequent meaningful thought and concept formation is organized. That's why the first years are so important. Just the early childhood aspects of things is so important to our life. And that brings us to the architecture of the early mind. There are 7 core image schemas formed from bodily experience. Path, P-A-T-H, the simplest conceptualization of an object following a trajectory through space, being able to track an object. Link, now these are what we would now call in Jean Knox's system archetypes. Link, the coupling of objects with path to form the primitive infant concept of animacy, living movement, that things move together in a path that is linked with other things in a path, like a family link, the tribe link, the nation link, all those. We'll talk about how this gets extended into metaphorical images that are our highest conceptualizations when we're 50 years old or whatever. But as a child, we're developing these patterns, which are archetypal. They're image schemas that, because of our development, something is out. Spatial orientation of removing, selecting, extending to abstract, choosing, or differentiating. So that's going to come up a lot in adolescent, or when you're going to want to move out, the launching phase. Splitting, that's the embodiment of mathematical rules of physical division. The foundation for psychological splitting processes. You're all good or you're all bad. I'm only as good as my last performance. So if I strike out 3 times today, it doesn't matter if I hit 2 home runs the day before. Splitting, it's like the good object and the bad object. Up, down. You're the best therapist in the world, and then the next week when you ask for could you pay the fee? Oh, you're the worst therapist ever, or whatever. up, down, basic spatial orientational mapping. This is where we get spirituality, up and down, down into hell, down into the earth, up into space. We have this up, down is an archetype. Pow, force. Primitive conceptual structure derived from physical interactions and resistance. Force versus force, or Tai Chi. That's the opposite. Wu-wei. Using the force against other people or with other people in order to achieve a greater whole. Part whole. Foundational mapping of components relating to a larger entity, like you and your mom, you and your family, you and your country, you Earth. When the aliens attack, we are going to be all together as Earthlings, as you see here. Part whole. These empty architectural frameworks are the true archetypes as such, awaiting relational experience to provide them with meaning. They only get a meaning when we put them into an internal working model. One of the schemas is splitting in two. The metaphorical extension. How does this evolve into drama and tragedy? Aristotle and all the things we think about or read about, on and on and on, in our psychology, in our emotionality. Metaphorical extension. The mind projects primitive physical experiences into the cognitive domain to conceptualize abstract mental entities as the youth grows. The splitting schema, as a baby, grows into the great artist, the comedy and tragedy, Nietzsche, understanding all these extremely Hegel, all the dialectical behavior therapy, on and on. In order that all comes from us understanding these image schemas. If the empty image schema equals the archetype as such, then the innumerable metaphorical extensions equal the archetypal image. Like all the images we have, or the movie Odysseus or Project Hail Mary. Those are images that represent archetypes of these ones that they were just reimagining, revisioning, and not in a biological way as much as in a sociological and attachment theory way. For instance, John Bowlby's concept of internal working model. It really goes along with this case study in deconstructing the mother archetype. The internal working model is a concept which provides a synthesis of schema or mental model theory with implicit memory in the context of human relationships with our mother, for instance. Internal working models are the implicit unconscious maps. They're the maps, the topography of our accumulated experience of past relationships with key attachment figures, like mom, dad, grandpa, teacher, brother, sister, that we draw on to anticipate and understand new human encounters and relationships. When we fall in love as an adolescent, or we fall in love at 50 or whenever. The key features of internal working models demonstrate the ways in which experiences of key relationships are registered and then organized and stored in memory. Now, according to Bowlby, the essential features of an internal working model is it's an experience of real relationships. It's internalized. The representations of these relationships are stored as schemas or working models, and the form of these models take is in fact more strongly determined by the child's actual experiences through childhood than was formerly supposed. Whatever representational models of attachment figures and of self an individual builds during his childhood and adolescence, these tend to persist into and throughout life. As a result, any new person to whom an attachment is formed, a couple relationship, becomes assimilated into existing model and perceptions that persons are organized by the existing model, even in the face of evidence that the model is inappropriate. The influence that existing working models have on current perceptions operates outside awareness, so it's unconscious. And as Jung said, the thing about the unconscious is it really is unconscious. You don't know it. Okay, so the myth. There is no innate mother archetype stored in the human genome waiting to be triggered. The extension that we have from our own nurturing, the extension through time and narrative like stories, images, fairy tales, theory of mind, all that is involved. Containment is a concept. The concept of containment is metaphorically extended into the psychological, emotional, and mythological concept of a nurturing guardian mother figure. Schema, this repeated bodily experience generates the spatial image. Schema of containment. In the sensation, a newborn experiences the physical warmth, boundary, and pressure of being physically held. So you have this whole circle. That's the archetype of containment, which is also called the Great Mother archetype, depending on the myth. Scaffolding the mind, attachment theory, the empty scaffold. Image schemas provide the initial primitive architecture, but they are empty, and the content is provided by real interpersonal experience. Look at this. Reminds me of when my daughter was 2 or 3. She would get really, really close. You have to really be able to get close to people to do this. She got really, really close to my face, and she looked in the black part of my eyes and really close, and she said, "I can see myself reflected in your eye. I can see myself reflected in your eyes." And if you really look, get really, really close to somebody and look them in the eye, you'll see the reflection of that. That's a kind of a simplistic, childlike way of, but really a metaphorical way of understanding attachment and mirroring, and the mirror neurons that we would talk about. Internal working models, according to John Bowlby's attachment theory, through repeated interactions with primary caregivers, infants build implicit maps of how these relationships work. These models organize day-to-day relational experience and govern our expectations of the world. Like anxious or disorganized attachment, anxious, worrisome attachment. There's all different kinds of attachments people can get. Okay, but that's a whole other lecture I'm going to give. The pinnacle of symbolic capacity, reflective function. That's what we as therapists need to learn in order to help people, is the reflective function. How do we need to learn that as parents? We learn that in bosses of organizations. We need to learn that as supervisors of interns. The reflective function, and this is Fongy. This has to do, I forgot his first name, Fongey, mentalization theory. But it goes into Jung and all kinds of depth psychology. But reflective function is the mind's ability to represent itself, to picture itself. It's being able to step back and have that Bodhi mind, that witnessing part of yourself that you learned in mindfulness. It is the sophisticated capacity to recognize oneself and others as distinct subjects, not objects, but as subjects with independent beliefs, desires, and intentions. The world, Lord knows the world needs this right now. When we have leaders that can't do this, but this reflective function is what you want out of a good, healthy partner, father, mother, caregiver, grandparent, whatever, supervisor. Knox views the archetype as emerging directly from this reflective function. It is the ultimate product of the developmental chain, transforming raw bodily data and relational attachment into profound conscious meaning making of the archetypes. Clinical application. The analyst as mirror. Clients with insecure internal working models often lack crucial reflective function, leaving them unable to find meaning in their actions. The analyst acts as a mirror neurons, actively demonstrating their own reflective function. So you see how he has this whole chaos here. I'm able to chew it up a little bit, but I can feel it there, but I don't have to get control with it, and I give it back. That's called metabolizing the projective identification. When you hear my lectures on projective identification, this is how the analytical third works. This is a third thing in between here, the imaginal space. By repeatedly showing the client that the analyst can find meaning and intentionality in the client's behavior, the analyst provides the scaffolding for the client to construct their own sense of a conscious mind, just as the parent does that for a child. The mythos of the wounded healer. So in order to do this, we have to understand our own wounds and our own pains. To be an effective, untangled mirror The analyst must undergo rigorous self-analysis. Jung argued that an analyst can only heal what they have himself faced. Well, you have to face your own unconscious, your own shadow, your own anonymous, and your other, and your devilish part of you, and you're also the angelic part of yourself. You have to face all those parts of yourself in order to individuate, and you never really get there. But the Greek god of medicine, Asclepius, which at the end of Plato's Republic, he said, sacrifice a cock for Asclepius, a rooster for Asclepius, to Asclepius for me, as he was being gone to his death. A Greek god of medicine who was struck by Zeus' bolt embodies the wounded healer. He was struck by Zeus for healing people. He represents the clinician who transforms their own trauma and wounds into the profound capacity for empathy and emotional containment for the patient. The grand synthesis. The image, a schema of our schemas that have developed in our early childhood, or babyhood, our infancy, plus attachment equals the archetype-as-such. Archetypes are not archaic ghosts hiding in our DNA. They are emergent miracles of human development, forged in the crucible of our earliest bodily experiences and our profound need for human connection. And this is to be continued in your clinical practice. You'll learn a lot about this. This is Dr. Brian Lippincott, and I'm professor of psychology at the John F. Kennedy School of Psychology at National University, and I'm the author of Analytical Psychology and Family Systems, Neo-Jungian Psychology to Help Families Find Flow. That's my flow concept, and I'm going to be around to answer any questions about archetypes and the controversial issues that they're bringing up of how they come to be in the developmental psychology of attachment theory. Anything that you want, you can ask me during class, or if you're online or watching this on YouTube, you can send me a comment, and I will answer your comment and your questions to the best of my ability. Thank you very much. Brian Lippincott signing off.